And panelists, don't forget to unmute your microphones.
Sounds good.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Sadia Sindhu, and I'm the Executive Director for the UChicago Center for Effective Government, housed here at the Harris School of Public Policy. I'm thrilled to welcome you all this evening for what I know will be a fascinating and wide-ranging discussion of digital and social media dynamics in our nation's politics. We have about an hour and a half scheduled for this evening for a robust panel discussion, followed by 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A. As questions arise, I would like to invite you all to drop the questions into the Q&A function of Zoom at any time during the event, and we'll pass those along to our moderator for the Q&A portion of the event. Before we get started, I wanted to provide you all a quick overview of our work and mission at the UChicago Center for Effective Government. The center was founded in 2019 with an ambitious and important mission: to study, debate, and advance reforms that strengthen democratic institutions and improve the capacity of our government to solve public problems. As we all know, these critical issues have only come into sharper relief in the last year and a half. In that time, we've embarked on numerous efforts organized around ideas, education, and engagement that have brought together a wide range of stakeholders, such as tonight, with a vested interest in making government more effective, and those efforts are just beginning. I invite you to keep in touch with CEG by visiting our webpage, signing up to receive our newsletter, and following our work on Twitter. With that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to my colleague, CEG Senior Advisor, Mark Farinella, who will introduce tonight's event. Welcome.
Thank you, Sadia, and thank you all for joining what is going to be a great panel discussion tonight. If you are interested in politics or interested in the future of political campaigns, particularly online, I think you're in for a really exciting and interesting conversation. We have with us today some of the nation's top political digital strategists from both sides of the aisle. And in fact, moderating the event today is Ben Olson, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Arena, one of the nation's top Republican digital firms. In addition to moderating, I'm hoping Ben will feel free to chime in with his own thoughts during the program, just as the panelists will. Ben will introduce the panelists in just a moment, but I want to mention to you that we'll be messaging out to you the links to the panelists' websites and their biographies so you can learn more about them. We encourage you to take a look and get to know a bit more about these panelists. And don't forget to send in your questions. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. We won't necessarily be calling out your name, but we're going to try and incorporate your questions into the conversation today. And with that, I'll just turn things over to Ben. Ben, would you like to take it away?
All right. Thank you, Mark. I am excited to be here. I think this will be a really great discussion. As Mark mentioned, all the panelists are working at the highest levels of their respective parties, political industries. And so, with us, let me introduce our panelists. We have on the Democratic side of the aisle, Kari Chisholm, President of Mandate Media. And Kari, did I pronounce your last name right?
Got it. Yep.
All right. We also have Annie Levene. She's a partner at Rising Tide Interactive. Hey, Annie. And Patrick McHugh, partner in Gambit Strategies. On the Republican side of the aisle, in addition to myself, we have Carter Kidd. She's the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Campaign Solutions. And we also have Shannon Chatlos. She's the Vice President at Strategic Partners in Media. So, Mark mentioned this, but we won't go into the full bio of everyone who's on our panel, but you can learn more about them and see their bios in the links that we're messaging out to you. And, as Sadia mentioned, please feel free to message in your questions at any time. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can. And we've got a few questions to kick this off right now. We'll start a little bit broad and then we'll drill down. So I'll open this up to our panelists. 2020 is now over, the election's history. Broadly speaking, were voters well served by the internet?
Just gonna throw it out there, right?
Just gonna throw it out there.
Well, I can go ahead and start off unless somebody else wants to. I think if we look back over this past year with COVID-19, I do think the internet played an integral role in our elections and in our entire society. I mean, if you think back, if something like this had happened 20 years ago, our worlds would have been so different. So many of us were able to shift and be able to continue working. Kids figured out how to do school. And for our campaign clients, they shifted to online campaigning. So as a digital campaign firm, for us, it ended up being great for business. And we still had to be very creative and think about how we're going to get through all the other messages since everyone else is doing the same thing. But I do think the internet made a positive impact overall. There's a lot of challenges that were out there, but without the internet, it would have been a completely different election cycle.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I mean, not just election cycle, but our society itself. Digital made this possible. I mean, be able to do conferences like this, meetings, people are able to work. If you think about just the sort of total isolation that we would have had without digital. That said, in 2020 in particular, I think partly because of the pandemic, but also because of where we are in our political culture, digital also is pretty damaging to the fabric of our republic. I mean, the rise of conspiracy theories, the QAnon conspiracy in particular, I think was partly fueled by the pandemic, but also partly fueled by, sort of the metastasizing of our social media platforms into sort of segmented, segregated, filtered bubbles that didn't allow people to, sort of see the whole world for what it is, and instead spend their time in these little sort of back corners of the internet where they were reinforced on what they believed and then fed a steady stream of lies. I don't mean it's just on the right either, although I think that was the most damaging one this year. There are folks on the left as well who spend their time mired in strange little conspiracy corners of the internet.
Yeah, I would add on that it also mainstreamed a lot of digital tools that people were kind of slowly onboarding, or kind of, especially with older voters. So, you saw them adopt more of the streaming platforms. We all know how to use QR codes now, thanks to the pandemic, and menus at restaurants. I can promise you my parents did not know how to do that prior to this. And maybe I didn't either, I'm not sure. Also, the other thing I would point out is some of the kind of more traditional tactics like teletown halls took off. I mean, so that was something we always had in our toolbox, but I don't know about you guys, but I saw we had way better participation in teletown halls than we had in cycles past, because it was a way for people to engage. So, I think it helped in a couple of different areas, not just what we would consider, traditional digital.
I do think one other piece of internet use that, at least looking back, I think some folks missed was the kind of bubble that we existed in as people that could stay at home and work from home. And, we were like, wow, everyone's streaming more video, everyone's watching more television. And it almost, we needed to reconsider that when it comes to voter contact, especially the types of voters that we're all fighting to convince on our side, those were the people that are probably less likely to be sitting at home on the internet. They were the ones still going in, working at the grocery stores or in the factory. And so I think one piece that I took away from it was actually not doing an over-reliance on internet and sort of the connected television or the high impact, expensive buys, but really being mindful of what are people looking up on their phones? Are they listening to Pandora while they're working? Those are ways to reach people where, traditional media folks were still sort of thinking, oh, well, people are just at home watching TV.
The only thing I would add is that, I think that campaigns were well served by the internet. I think for all the reasons you all just laid out. I'm not sure voters were. For the reasons that Kari sort of laid out. I think that increasingly people are, filtering themselves, particularly on social media, into these bubbles where they're only hearing views that they already hold, and they're reinforcing these views even if they are rooted in conspiracies. And we're seeing that take hold right now when you see vaccination rates among some communities, vaccination refusal rates being particularly high. And I'm just not sure that I think all of our campaigns we worked on were able to adapt to that new environment, thanks to the internet, thanks to all these tools that we had in our toolbox. We got to use more than maybe we were expecting to use this election cycle. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure the voters really gained all that much from that experience. Thanks to, frankly, a lot of the organic problems that are sort of existing on these platforms.
I mean, I think, we should also, I think as political professionals, take a little bit of caution. I spend a lot of time worrying about whether the work that I do, which is to, find issues that mobilize our party's base and use those issues to fire them up, get them angry, give us money. I worry about whether that's actually good for democracy. And sort of again, in the polarization context. A few years ago, I was one of the ones in the room at the University of Chicago saying, polarization, that's overblown, that's okay, people need to choose their corner and we'll go to, we'll fight, that's why we have elections. And now I'm in a world where I wonder if polarization is actually a bad thing for democracy and the role that we all play in it. And that's less of a conclusion and more of a question for myself, I keep asking every day.
It's a bad idea for primaries, we know that.
I think it goes to a lot of our societal changes that are happening in everyday life. Everything has become much more extreme in a lot of things. And the internet in some way has enabled that, because kind of what you were to go to your point, Kari, is you can find anybody who might want to be in your corner much more easily than you ever could before. And you have this great platform that is easily accessible. It's often free. And that's just changed the dynamic of how we interact and things that we say that seem okay, because it's easy to put it out there when there's no face associated with it. So I agree. We look at those things as well.
So that's
back in the
great.
in the mid 1990s. Let me just tell a story. Back in the mid 1990s, right after the '94 Gingrich Revolution, there was talk of Rush Limbaugh running for president, and Rush said one of the smartest things I've ever heard. It's a rare thing. Let me hear me agree with him any other time. Rush said, 10% market share in talk radio makes you the king of talk radio, but it makes you a laughing stock in politics, where of course we need 50% plus one to win an election. And what I worry is that we've all become sort of people who live on a 10% market share. That's how you raise money, is to build that 10% market share of people who really, really love you. And it's, that's a piece of, again, as I said, worrying me.
Nice. I think it's very obvious that the internet is a great source of information. I saw a funny meme about a week ago that said, if you took Abraham Lincoln and dropped him into today's society and you showed him this little device that had access to all pieces of information ever, and he said, well, everybody must be a genius then, everybody, and the response was, no, everyone just uses it to troll each other and look at cat photos. So that being said, the internet is obviously a wonderful source for information. There are some negative aspects of it, the polarization piece, but also some of the false information that circulates on it. The next question, and I'll just kind of go here in reverse order. So Patrick, I'll kick this off to you. Who bears responsibility for some of the adverse effects of the digital, particularly some of the ad networks and some of the social media networks? Is this something, when it comes to politics, that campaigns are responsible for, their staff, or do we need a third-party watchdog, or is it the networks themselves?
Yeah, in my opinion, it should be the networks themselves. I mean, they are sort of, particularly the social media networks like Facebook, not only allowing polarization to run rampant in this fake information to run rampant on their platform. They're making money from it. I mean, they're making conscious decisions every single day to have their algorithm favor information that is inflammatory and that will drive further polarization, and often includes information that isn't true. And so ultimately, I think that they're responsible for the content that is being being served to people on their platforms. And I think that you know, a lot of focus is around the content and advertising. But I think to me, the most troubling thing, the things that, you know, I think the platforms need to figure out how to solve is on the organic side of things, where really you see that is where misinformation really flourishes, and not as much on the sort of advertising side of things, where candidates and campaigns, right, are held to account for the information that they are putting money behind, you know, more so than, you know, a random citizen who is just spreading false information about whatever they might not agree with that day.
Yeah. Shannon, how about you? What do you think bears responsibility?
I think we all do. I mean, I think I think it's everybody's responsibility to, you know, to be honest and speak the truth. I think the challenge is that you've got a lot of different truths that people feel. I think that I commend Facebook for trying to, you know, they created that third party group, their Supreme Court, if you will. I think that's what people are kind of calling it, to try to, you know, weigh in and develop a ruling. But when it came down to it, the folks on that panel basically said, no, we don't want to have it on our shoulders. We want Facebook to have to make that decision themselves. So, I mean, this is, if you place a television ad and then you have false information in the television ad gets taken down and lawyers get involved. We just don't have as much transparency on, you know, the digital side right now. And there's just a lot of platforms. I mean, we, as you guys all know, it's very hard for us to see, you know, if a Republican campaign is running a certain digital ad campaign, it's hard for our opponent to see what we're running out there. It's not, you know, on the everyday broadcast waves. So this is not going to be solved anytime soon, I don't think. What do you guys think? I mean, I just think but I think everybody bears responsibility. I do think as political practitioners and leaders in our industry, we should set an example. And we do have a code of ethics. We all are members of different organizations that have a code of ethics, and it's up to us to kind of lead there. But, you know, I agree with Patrick that a lot of it's happening from the organic side, not necessarily the paid side.
And I think Facebook's a rare network that has unified Democrats and Republicans in our frustration of them. You know, there are other ad networks, they don't talk about it. You know, Hulu does ads reviews. They submit it, a real human looks at it, and they say whether or not this is something that they feel is okay to run on their network. Facebook doesn't want to take on that responsibility. And, you know, ahead of Georgia special election, really just wasn't being an honest broker. They said, we can't just run ads in one state. That's not functionally possible. And, you know, we knew from the beginning that you actually can, because we've done that targeting in all the states we've worked on. And then they reversed course because, you know, people applied, rightfully so, pressure. But that impacted candidates' ability to raise money. It impacted on both sides. It impacted candidates' ability to communicate with voters, and they did it just because they didn't want to deal with it. So it's not just, you know, what is going on the network. It's just functionally they're not really inspiring brand loyalty with digital advertisers, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much subjectivity. You do need a human looking at it at the end of the day. And that's not perfect, but I agree with what you're saying, Annie. I mean, it wasn't working to not have human involvement at some level. And it's incumbent upon all of us. And I think the biggest challenge that we saw and we've continued to see on platforms beyond just advertising, you know, email platforms and things, it's subjective. You know, what one person is saying, no, I'm just, you know, impassioned about something, somebody else feels is going too far. And, you know, where is the line? Certainly there is the code of ethics, and I think a lot of us follow it, but there's still even gray areas beyond that. You know, what is specifically saying it's too much versus not.
I'm just going to echo what Patrick was saying about the algorithms. You know, I have some sympathy for Facebook in where they started in all this, which is to say, look, if you're building a social network and you want people to look at your stuff and pay attention all day long, which is going to be how you're going to make some money, you're try and figure out what content is the most interesting to people, the most exciting, the one that's getting all the likes and the clicks. Well, then you're going to share that with people. It seems like a fairly content neutral, kind of obvious solution to the question of, well, what's interesting? Share that. And yet now we're in a position where the stuff that is the most interesting and the most sticky, the most engaging is the stuff that's false. And so I don't blame Facebook for not having seen it ahead of time. I blame them now, having been forewarned, having experienced it. We've all seen it, that they're not then finding a way to resolve it. And, and again, in the resolving it, there's some sympathy there. They simply don't have enough humans to read everything that everybody posts, but they have enough humans to read everything that gets, I'll call it 100,000 shares at a time. Like that's enough. That's a small enough sample that they could filter. They could slow down the engagement train. If something's suddenly taking off, maybe it's something funny somebody just said on a live TV show. That's great. Everybody should share that. Or maybe it's a wild conspiracy theory that is dangerous, and they should put the brakes on, have a human reviewer. It's time for them to get their act together.
That's great. It's a very complex argument, but I think for the most part, people agree that, what different campaigns and political operatives are dealing with right now would be one of two things. And it kind of sometimes falls along party lines, but it transcends both. And that is censorship a bigger problem, and over censorship or not enough censorship versus, too many things being allowed. There not being enough controls. And so I would just, ask the panel, everyone jump in. Do you see one of those issues being more problematic than the other? Again, censorship versus an over allowance of content.
I think, go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I was just going to say that if the censorship problem to me becomes a problem for the stability of the platform itself, because if people feel that they're over censored, they're going to go somewhere else. So it's just, we're going to be chasing an audience at that point. So, I don't think people will stay on platforms that are over censored.
I just thought it was, sort of ironic where, the Trump campaign and President Trump were complaining about censorship, where it's like, he had the biggest microphone and the biggest platform in the world. You can use your press briefing room to have that conversation with America. You sign a terms of service and agreement when you decide to use these platforms. You're not, I think, essentially born with a God-given right to be able to post on Facebook, essentially. So I think you need to play by some sort of rules, or else, there are unintended or intended consequences. I think we saw a little bit of that in January.
Yeah, I mean, I think if, obviously Facebook has the right to take people off their platform who don't follow their rules. I would say as a general principle, if I was Facebook, I would say, well, we're going to allow everyone to be here, and we're going to give people the freedom to say whatever they want to say. But there's no right, there's right to free speech. There's not a right to be amplified. And that to me is the key difference here, is that sure, post all you want, but if you post something that is harmful, dangerous, false, whatever the rules are, we're just not gonna, you'll still have your post. It's just not gonna get amplified out to a broader public. Stuff that's really engaging, that is legitimate and fair and upstanding, great. Let it spread like wildfire. Stuff that's dangerous and false ought to slow down.
I think dangerous is the most important key there, right? I mean, there's been a lot of very dangerous rhetoric, and that's what has to stop. And I totally think that should be stopped by the platforms themselves, if possible.
Yeah, we saw it on email systems as well, going beyond just Facebook. And I think that's where certainly some of our clients kind of came in to have some challenges, because that's where it's even more gray. It was not, absolutely, it's very clear if you're inciting violence, but if you are, the days after the election, questioning if things are valid or not when it's unknown, that, is more of they were feeling that was starting to be censored. Once we knew, and once, Biden is sworn in and things like that, there's more understanding to curb some of that. But I think that it was a challenge for our clients to deal with, and that's going beyond Facebook. Because I agree exactly with what you're saying, Kari, with amplification, but it's a little different. If you have an email list and can send it out, you can still spread your message very quickly.
Yeah, at least at that point, though, it's got a. I mean, in the early days of the internet, we all had relatives and friends who would pass along chain letters and false conspiracy theories. But the viral spread of that is so much less, right, than what can happen on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. It's so much less when you're, everybody's just emailing a few dozen friends their whatever their crazy conspiracy theories.
Patrick, what about you? Any thoughts on the censorship issue?
Yeah, to me, I think it's sort of a false choice. I'm not sure that I would characterize what they're doing as censorship. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they also view they have some responsibility for the things that are posted on their platform, and if they're dangerous to people, that they're going to take them down. It's not just in the political space, right? If somebody threatens some physical violence to another person on Facebook, or somebody flags that post, they'll take it down, and they'll be alerted to that. And so I sort of, I hear what y'all are saying in terms of sort of your inability to get the message out to voters through email systems. But at the end of the day, you choose to use that email provider, you can go to another one. And I think that all of these providers and platforms, you sign up terms of service, and if you violate them, they can no longer provide you service. I mean, it's a pretty simple transaction in the marketplace, so I don't really view it as censorship. I view it as a necessity almost.
I think that's where we saw kind of a change this year, was because I completely agree with what you're saying, Patrick. I mean, like, terms of service are laid out. I think what we experience with a lot of email systems is they're like, well, yeah, it says it's okay in our terms of service, but we don't really like what you're saying. And that's where it was becoming a friction point of like, okay, well, if it follows it, then how do we do it? But you're right. And the solution is you go somewhere else.
So
The thing there is you have choices, right? There's a lot of email broadcasting providers. There's only one Facebook. There's only one Twitter, right? And so that becomes the tension there, for sure.
So I do want to take a question from the audience, and I totally recognize that this question might be a little bit controversial, but we want to have a little sense of giving the people what they want. So if anybody wants a pass on answering this question, no problem at all. So it's a two-part question. The first is Facebook's Supreme Court enough of a way to create some kind of objectivity with the issue of post reviews? And secondly, should former President Donald Trump stay banned from all social platforms, or do you view this as an infringement on free speech? So Kari, we'll just go reverse order. What do you think?
I am fascinated by the Facebook Oversight Board, the Supreme Court. It's worth reading the bios of every single person on it. They are a diverse group. They speak dozens of languages. They're from all over the world. Come from an extraordinary range of backgrounds, former prime ministers, former U.S. federal judges. It's a fascinating group. So to the extent that Facebook's responsible for setting up a sort of independent outside body, I think they've done a good job of picking the body. Now, the challenge is what role do they play? As Shannon alluded to a few minutes ago, they kind of kick back a question to Facebook on Donald Trump. We're not going to decide, you decide. When some of their earlier decisions had laid down fairly clear principles that they expected Facebook to follow. Is it a good body? Yeah, I think it's a useful thing for Facebook to sort of have an outside group that has limited terms. They're paid whether they whether Facebook likes what they do or not. That's, I think, a useful structure for corporate governance. Should there be outside rules that are actually like federal laws and stuff? Yes, of course. But in the absence of government regulation, this is an attempt by Facebook to create some kind of a layer. as for Donald Trump, look, neither he nor anyone else has an absolute right to, a business, to use a Facebook account, right? You don't have an absolute right to go to the mall either. And so, Facebook wants to ban him. Great, go for it. That's within their rights. Should they ban him? I think as long as he's continuing to promulgate the big lie that he won the election, that he's some sort of power in exile, ready to seize control as soon as he can get it. Yeah, absolutely. He should be, banished from polite society, much less social media platforms. Absolutely.
My beef with the Facebook oversight board is I don't actually think anyone there is a digital advertising practitioner. And I think everyone on this panel knows what a pain in the butt it is to even get approved to run ads. And even then it is half of a nightmare just to get them live. And you have an oversight board that functionally doesn't understand the product. And that's great that you have really amazing bios and great experience, but a board functionally should be something that offers, expertise. And again, I think the recommendations, the conversations, they're not really getting to the root of some of the issues that we're discussing today because they have no real life experience with what they're trying to suss through. So in that way, I don't know how effective they've been, or I certainly, haven't really seen much happening over there. I'll just, double click on Kari's opinion on Trump. I certainly feel a lot more calm these days, not having to see those tweets and Facebooks, and I didn't even follow him on Twitter. It was just in my feed, and it was something that I wasn't asking for, but because of the way that these social media platforms work, it was there. And so, if you aren't going to abide by the rules of the road, then you don't need to be on it, is sort of my opinion here.
You're right about the lack of advertising experience, or even the lack of sort of political experience, or digital politics experience on the board. They haven't addressed any advertising questions, I don't believe, yet, but that'll come. And you're right, they're going to need some folks with some expertise. I'm not sure anybody on the Facebook side of the political advertising a transaction has used their platform for political advertising. They're not eating their own dog food, as they say in Silicon Valley.
Shannon or Patrick, any thoughts on the Facebook Supreme Court, and is President Trump's banning infringement on free speech, or the appropriate thing to do?
Facebook Supreme Court, I think it is a step in the right direction. I could not agree with Annie more. It can deal with some big umbrella issues. And I think they've come down with 3.5 decisions since they were started. So, but I do, at least it's something, right? And at least it's people that are qualified, and as far as an intellectual diversity standpoint. I don't know what to do about Trump. I don't know if we put him on some sort of probation and every single thing he says has to be screened before it's released, or, but I do think that it caused so much collateral damage for so many other candidates and races that has to be in consideration, that because of one person's behavior, the collateral damage on the electoral process was tremendous. So that's something to be considered.
Yeah. And I think, it's an important distinction that he's actually not banned from all social media platforms, just the ones that he wants to use. He has his own website, which he calls a platform, which is a blog, and he posts his opinions on there, and people, if they care about what Donald Trump thinks, can go on there and read them at their own free will. And so I think that's an important distinction. I think, Annie, to your earlier point about the board reminds me of, frankly, some of the Senate oversight hearings where Mark Zuckerberg sat there. And it's very clear that many of these senators, many of whom are in the party that I fight very hard to elect people to Congress from, have never been on Facebook in their entire lives. And they're sort of wholly unequipped to be able to provide oversight and propose, frankly, any regulations on the platforms that they've never used in their life. And so I think that it is a problem not just for the oversight board, but frankly, we need more people in elected office who have sort of come of age with the internet and understand the unique challenges that are facing our society as we move more and more online.
I think that's a very important note that Annie brought up about the difficulty that she experiences with on getting things live. I think there's a misperception in the public that the ad networks are more helpful to one party or the other. And, in an effort of bipartisanship here on this call, I think a lot of us have dealt with very similar problems with how hard it is to actually get content through and get content live. I mean, again, a little bit putting people on the spot, and you can take a pass, but in terms of getting things live on Facebook and the other networks, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is very easy and smooth and you just post some ads and they become live, and 1 being extremely arduous, I think I would say we're at about a 4 right now, where it's really, really hard. And we are constantly trying to navigate their process, but how would you all rate that?
That was pretty generous rating.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've got, my ad team would actually probably give it a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think sometimes, they change their policies so frequently throughout the electoral process. So I think we all talked about this at another panel, but, one thing that was so frustrating was as soon as we all figured it out and we became our client advocate, we were able to get our clients approved on the platform, they'd change the rules again. But what if you didn't have a consultant by your side? What about the regular candidate who just needs to run, for county council or for mayor or for dog catcher? I mean, how are those people? They can afford consultants that, can navigate these very challenging platforms. So it's a real disservice to, the electoral process, I think, for the regular citizen candidate.
I completely agree. And we've had those exact discussions. Like we're people who've worked on these platforms, who know how to advocate, who know how to call somebody to get it. And we still have such a difficult time. And again, the rules always are changed every time we think we can do it. And I think it frustrates us even more because it looks like we don't know what we're doing when we go to our clients. Like, okay, this is what you need to do. Oh, sorry. No, Facebook changed the rules again. So I think it is a challenge. And I do think it impacts down ballot races who want to be able to run it, which is kind of the whole point of what Facebook has wanted to do with a lot of their political tools, is to make it easy and accessible, which is a great thing. And I think that's really important. People are on the platform, help those candidates use that platform, but it's become so difficult and they just didn't actually talk to normal people that needed to use it.
Yeah, a good example of this in real life, the Priorities USA last cycle, we were able to, Facebook wouldn't run a number of our ads. We were able to push them to approve them because we threw a lot of political weight around as one of the largest super PACs in the party, made a big public fuss about it, and still took several days to get them to a place where they would approve our ads. But any organization or candidate that doesn't have those sort of relationships can, call representatives very high up at Facebook and push on elected officials to also push them to do the right thing. They're not going to have that opportunity. And even just seeing on the other side publicly, the Biden campaign themselves were having a problem getting all of their ads approved. And so if a major presidential campaign in the final weeks of an election is having a problem, down ballot candidates certainly are just in a place where they're not going to be able to reach the voters they need to reach.
Patrick, are you talking about the difficulty of getting things approved because there's a judgment happening about the political content? They may not want to approve it because of the content, or are you just talking about the challenge of getting it through the pipeline, someone to look at it and check the box that it's okay? The mechanical part of it.
Right. It was the issue where they wanted all ads uploaded by a certain time in the final weeks to be able to run, because they wanted to be able to run reviews in time. And as a result, a lot of people uploaded a lot of ads to meet that deadline. right? Versions of ads that would run later towards the election. So vote tomorrow, for example, you would upload that weeks ahead of time to get it through the approval process, right? And that entire, the process that they laid out for us wasn't actually the process they followed, right? And so that, I think, is the bigger problem. Like, I would be fine with an arduous process. I'd be fine if it was a 4. The problem is they change it between a 1 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 every day, and you just never know when they're going to make these arbitrary changes, which of course is the right as a platform. But I think that is one of the key frustrations, is the constant change.
And even that the rules they set out and the platform that they built, like, you're one of the biggest guys in this space, and you're building a non-functional platform, right? You had months to prepare for this, and then you tell us, I don't think we actually were able to say vote tomorrow, right? We couldn't say vote today or something along those lines, but some ads came through with language that weren't actually supposed to be approved. And I don't think it was like malicious actors saying we want Donald Trump to say it and not Democrats. I think it was just like bad machine work. And so how can you even prepare for something as Facebook and not have it ready to go?
No way to run a lemonade stand, much less $1 billion a month business. It's just amazing.
I think it's interesting
Well,
if you look at all the backlash with like schools and virtual schools and like how schools not have been able to prepare to open and things like that. You know, you look at it in comparison to Facebook, similar, like you had all this time and it didn't work. And I think the schools are a much different situation, and Facebook had all the developers and engineers they could have used.
so I think we all agree the networks, especially Facebook and Google, are struggling with how to figure this out, how to execute it, how to monitor it. And, let's shift the conversation to bans of ads on platforms. We are into the cycle of 2022, and we now have political advertising banned on Twitter, on Snapchat, on Spotify. It's now gone and trickled down into certain DSPs. And, for audience members that don't know what a DSP is, it's a demand side platform, which is a way to buy online ads across the whole internet. And, that ban has started with some DSPs, with Adobe, one of the prominent ones. For me personally, I feel like that is a big violation of the First Amendment and of speech. And one of the things I think separates America out from the rest of the world is our campaign process. For all the benefits it has and all the negatives that it has, and some of the ill effects of it, it is a democratizing setup where people don't have to be an incumbent. People don't have to be independently famous or wealthy in order to run for office and succeed in office. There's lots of stories of people who, where some of the networks are basing their policies on an ad ban off of things in other countries. And, if we have a distribution medium like direct mail or television, you should be allowed to run and have political messaging into it. That is a right protected by the First Amendment. And for me personally, it scares me and freaks me out to see groups banning the political ad speech. So the question, everybody, and I'm going to put this in the chat as well, because it's a multi-part question. So that's in everyone's chat. So, several platforms have banned political advertising altogether. And even the largest platforms, Facebook and Google, instituted temporary bans. Ultimately they were lifted, but we had temporary bans after the general election. So the question is, what are they trying to achieve? What are the pros and cons of this? And do you see this as a potential end to a ban of political digital advertising on the web? I mean, is this something that could extend to the big networks? It seems like they're spending a lot of time, resources, and political capital dealing with this. Do we have a potential ban coming? And what can political campaigns do to adjust to these bans? So again, multi-parts, so it's in the chat.
I think a lot has to do with, impending regulation. I think a lot of these ad networks go, you know what, forget it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to be in the fray. I just want to step back. I agree with what you're saying. It concerns me from a First Amendment issue, from a democracy issue. Like, we need to be able to communicate messages. And I think with a lot of, just the hearings about Facebook, when there was all the data issues, a lot of companies went, you know what, easier just to bow out and not deal with it. And I think that is a sad state.
Yeah, I think it's lazy. I mean, a lot of this started with what happened in 2016, right? Where you had Russian operatives paying for ads in rubles on Facebook, designed to talk to American voters, on top of all the organic stuff that was happening there. It all starts, there. And what you had was a few folks like Facebook try and figure out a way to authenticate people. Remember, we all got postcards in the mail to confirm that we were a legitimate American, in the United States, to buy our ads and all that. And I can, there are others who just said, this is too complicated. So we're just going to ban political advertising because we don't want to deal with figure out how to authenticate folks. Now we should get into a space where we're talking a lot about the content of the ads, and are folks using paid advertising to drive violence or conspiracy theory nonsense? That's mostly not true. That all that action is mostly on the organic side, as Patrick was saying earlier. Frankly, I think one of the challenges is, as I think Shannon was alluding to earlier, all this regulation and this restrictions make it a lot harder for the dog catcher to run for office. And also, by the way, as a person who also owns a non-political small business with my spouse, it's almost impossible to run ads as a non-political small business, and all the various rules and all that. But to get to the question of, again, of banning political advertising, Ben, on the one hand, I think, well, gee, they're a private business. They can do whatever they want, right? I mean, that's the free market. On the other hand, if they're going to provide a service to the public, which is to say, we run ads, and if you're the local, dentist down the street, or you're Pepsi-Cola, you can buy ads, and then just say, but if you run for office, you're out. You're right. That does seem to be anti-democratic.
But to piggyback on that, what's political is very broad. So what if you're talking about creating jobs in your community? If you're talking about, a climate crisis, if you're talking about all these things fall under transportation, and now we're, all these businesses have an opportunity to participate in infrastructure. And so all of this, just so all our attendees know, like, all that actually falls under political. So it's not just candidate ads, it's also advocacy and community organizing. So it's not just political, and that's where I think we really get into a dangerous zone.
Yeah, the climate activists will say Exxon is out there running ads on Twitter saying we're doing our best to solve the climate crisis. Meanwhile, the Sierra Club can't run ads saying Exxon's the cause of the climate crisis. There's a little bit of a unfairness there.
And look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, is my opinion not backed up by any fact. I would imagine that Facebook probably would have kept the ban if Democrats didn't control Congress. If, by and large, Democrats raise more money on Facebook than Republicans do. We rely more on small dollar donors, and we foster those donors. And one of the premium platforms that we do so is on Facebook. And I have a hunch that if those power dynamics were not at play, they might have kept the ban in place. They weren't getting a lot of pressure from Democrats who hold power now in Washington to reverse it. To me, it's a very troubling trend, and I think even more troubling that the advertisements aren't the problem. Like I said before, it's the organic, oftentimes content that is most problematic, and not the ads themselves.
And I do think that it's an important distinction, which is for the vast majority of the Facebook spend that we do for clients is for fundraising. It's for raising money. It's for acquiring new email addresses. As a mobilization and persuasion platform, there are better options out there. And so one of the ways that we're really adjusting on, both in 2020 because we had to, because the ads were shut down, but moving forward, we have the records of the amount of spend that we spent on Facebook cycle over cycle over cycle, and it's shrinking. If you really want to get an impactful 30-second ad across to a viewer, Facebook is not the platform to do it because most people have the sound off and they're scrolling down to see like your new baby photo from your best friend. And so what we're doing, at least as a company, is really preparing for the post-Facebook world and finding other viable options for serving ads that we know are effective. Like you don't need an emoji to make your ad work. You need compelling, authentic content and a good targeting strategy.
I think that's at times what makes it even more concerning that all these other platforms are bowing out, because I totally agree. You know, we want other ways to communicate messages and things like that. And if no one wants to run these ads, that's hard. It's hard to support our candidates and get them elected and then promote all the issues we need to talk about.
I can see that one of our viewers took great exception to what I said about free speech. And one thing that I want to clarify is that, yes, these are private companies, and private companies do have a lot of leeway as to what they can and can't do and say. I think where, from my point of view, there's conflict here is that at what point do they stop being a private company versus a distribution channel versus a means that's ingrained into our lives that we use, that everybody uses on a day-to-day basis, and is like television, is like your mailbox. And so that's what I meant by the First Amendment and protected free speech. Yeah, private company can allow what they want, but when it's not a private company and it's a utility, when it's a network, well, then it does need to be, and there's debate as to what these groups are. So if anyone wants to dive into that more, I can also tie it into another question that we have from the audience, that is, given the problems and critiques that these networks face and the revenue that they receive on the other, from their point of view, are they wise or foolish to just get rid of political advertising?
Well, Ben, so Facebook is a public company. If we want to, and they have shareholders, and they can be punished by their shareholders. So to not defending you there, but you know, if Facebook makes a mistake, they are going to have repercussions in the marketplace. And if they stop advertising on political, then again, they're going to have to define that, because right now they're defining it very broadly, and they're going to lose revenue, and they are a public company. So they're, you know, if they choose to do that, I think they're going to take a hit.
Yeah, Ben, I think you raised an interesting question a bit ago. You know, to me, the best, I mean, the broadcast networks are a good analogy, but so are like power companies, private power companies that are so integral to people's lives. We regulate them as public utilities. You know, you can't just shut off somebody's power. You don't feel like serving them anymore. And there's an interesting question there. I mean, the audience attendee who was asking the question about what's free speech got to do with private companies? Well, except that if they're going to offer a service to everyone, every business, everybody can advertise. Oh, because there's one class of advertisers, which happens to be the most important for our democracy, which is, you know, political campaigns and political advocacy organizations. There ought to be some questions about public utility regulation. Now, I want to make sure we hang a lantern on that for a second. What we have here is a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats, and even the Republicans are talking about regulating corporate behavior, which I think maybe might have been a little bit surprising a few years ago to see you all talking about regulating private behavior. I think it's a fascinating commentary on where we have come in our politics today.
That's great. Patrick, Carter, Annie, anything you want to weigh in there on?
I mean, I think it's foolish for them to ban advertising. Again, like I said before, I don't think advertising is the problem. I recognize that, you know, they're probably not making that much money relative to the other parts of their business on political advertising. So I could see in their head how banning it would solve some discomfort politically in the short term, but that's also banning it also causes them discomfort. And like I said before, the reason why I think Facebook turned it back on is because of the pressure they were receiving by those in power in Washington. I think that the reason why I think that moving back and forth between bans is foolish is because you're not actually solving the real problem. And by constantly changing your mind, you're actually putting yourselves directly in the crosshairs of regulators, as opposed to having some consistency in your beliefs.
No, I agree with that. And I think that's where I found the frustration with some of the other ad networks deciding to ban ads, because it's not the organic content that is often driven and, is being played into by algorithms. It's often a specific buy, who you're targeting and you're, sharing a political message. And I don't think, just lumping that in with organic Facebook posts makes sense. Like, they're different things, they need to be handled differently. But I get it from some of the companies' points of view. It's just not worth the fight. It's easier to bow out, and I think that's too bad. And that's an issue that I think we have to work through.
All right. So we've focused a lot about the advertising piece, Facebook, Google, a lot of the ad networks. The internet and digital is obviously a lot more encompassing. There's websites, apps, social, organic social. There's now a trend of messenger apps being used for wider distribution of discourse. So, my question for all the panelists would be, where are we headed in terms of online politics? With 2022 and another presidential in just a few short years of 2024, where are we going? What are we going to see more of? What will we see less of?
In a weird way, the pandemic was sort of a time for us to shine as digital practitioners, because people started to acknowledge that it's not just, a tactic to money grab in terms of raising money through email or ads, but actually every part of modern campaigning is touched by, the digital infrastructure. And I think that that's going to continue to grow. You touched on apps, and I think that it's sort of as like I hear worries from the candidates that I work with about WhatsApp. That's something that is completely insulated within communities or families talking, and they're spreading misinformation within themselves. And culturally, I think that over indexes with potentially Hispanic voters, which is something that I think we all have our eye on, is where those voters are going to go in 2022. And so I think it just becomes bigger, and people know that there's more stuff to worry about, right? It used to be, what is someone saying on television? How am I replying back to it? And now candidates and anyone who is a savvy campaigner knows you just need to be on top of everything. And so the digital campaign just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger.
From our side, we didn't have as much use of apps, I would say. I mean, I think email still plays a critical role in what we're doing on the Republican side. Some of it's our donor base and things like that, but that's still, there's been a concerted effort for several years to really build email lists. I don't think that's going away. It still works very, very well. And, I don't know for the apps, it'll be interesting, but again, on our side, it hasn't been as much of a focus. Though, to go to what Annie's saying, I think the growing challenge is just there are more and more outlets that you need to keep track of and see what's being said and how can you respond. And to a degree, it's impossible to respond to everything, but how much can you at least keep on top of is really important to see, and how you are going to react or not.
I think I'll be watching for, and I don't know if it's the future of our politics, but we've all just spent now about a year and a half learning how to Zoom. We learned how to be remote. I will never again fly across the country for a 1 hour meeting. We've all learned how to do this, right? And a lot of our clients, our candidates, learned how to do high dollar fundraising through these digital platforms. Now, I'm not sanguine about it. Obviously, people want to have events again. Obviously, high dollar donors are going to have FaceTime. They want to press the flesh. They want to see you in person. So a lot of those things will come back as this pandemic recedes. But we will have all learned how to use these tools. And so I think there'll be an interesting question about, what about small dollar grassroots national Zoom fundraisers, Zoom events? Right now, we're all zoomed out. We're all burned out of Zoom, although apparently not for the whatever it is, 170 people who are here watching us. But once we all get back to real life, and then winter comes, I won't be at all surprised if people start to use this tactic to communicate in ways that wouldn't have been foreseen before the pandemic.
I continue to push back on that idea that we're all Zoomers for the rest of our life. I mean, I certainly am ready to get on out of there. But besides that, when it comes to people that maybe have just $5 to give to a candidate, or people that are persuadable voters, they don't have access to broadband. That's something that we'd like to change. They don't have high-speed internet. They don't have time to sit on a computer for 30 or an hour to talk to or hear from a candidate. So I really do think that there's some stuff that, because of our point of privilege and because we work on the internet, and it's a natural connection to assume we'll all be digital people for the rest of time. I do think that there will always be an in-person or traditional element of campaigns, because you just lose a huge part of a really, important part of the electorate.
I totally agree. There'll always be the in-person. I think though the Zoom events get kind of a middle group that we might not have had otherwise. The people who do work on the internet, who are busy and have different lives, they might be kind of just this other group that wouldn't have gone to an event, that aren't a high dollar person, and you can take advantage of it. Because I agree, like they're in the $5 donors where you get to see a big rally and feel that energy, that'll come back. But how do we expand and go after those people who aren't going to attend a rally but still want to give $20, maybe something like that?
Folks who want to listen to a Princess Bride, table read and chip in $10 to the Wisconsin Democrats or whatever it is. And those events are coming back.
To me, I think two things. One, on the organic side, and this might be a pie in the sky, crazy idea, but maybe people will be a little nicer to each other. I think and maybe be a little less polarized. I think it's really easy to tweet or post on Facebook some really inflammatory stuff, knowing that you're never going to see the people who you're arguing with in real life. And then when you see them in real life, you would never say some of the things that people say. And so as people start interacting more in person, that hopefully the temperature will get taken down a little bit. And number two, I think on the advertising front, I think the biggest changes that are going to happen in the industry are to come over the next year and a half that have nothing to do with the pandemic whatsoever, and more to do with our ability to target people with precision, as some of these additional changes come down the pike by Apple and Google.
I'm sorry, Patrick, are you saying that we're going to reduce the ability to target people with precision or increase?
Yeah, Apple's decision to not, to force people to opt in, for example, to allowing apps to track their behavior. And Google's decision to ban third-party cookies on Chrome. I think those are pretty. Will have more of an impact over the next year and a half in terms of what we do on a daily basis than the pandemic will.
It's a really good point. There was a report today that came out. I know the Wall Street Journal talked about it, and I'm sure it was everywhere else, that after Apple's move, only 4% of their users opted in to be tracked by their apps. I think a lot of us knew it would decrease, but being reduced down by 96% is a pretty big drop. For me, I see a lot of those implications as being like, well, those are just apps, right? So maybe, the apps of the past in politics really go away, and it's now really just mobile optimized web browsers. Maybe there's more broader targeting, less reliance on first party lists. I know folks that I've spoken with at various networks and platforms have said politics has been ahead of this since first party, which is targeting lists for our viewers. That hasn't been allowed on platforms like Google for at least this last election cycle. So now that this is trickling down to consumer industries, they're asking what to do, and the networks are telling us on the political side, oh, you guys are actually ahead of the game since you've been forced to deal with this for the last 2 years. You know, this, to Patrick's point, is a pretty big deal and a pretty big change. For our viewers out there, you've been able to track down to a very granular level the individuals. You could grab a list and have it be curated, loaded up, and target just those people, and then put cookies on them and track them wherever they go and whatever they do. That's changing. So what, you know, how big a deal do you all think this is going to be? And, you know, can we adapt, but do we suffer through that adaptation process?
The irony is not lost on me that Apple is doing this at the same time that they've created a tile that tracks you wherever you go. So I feel like, you know, we're all sort of buying into whatever corporate line people say about like, oh, this is for the consumer, but no, it's because there's like market competition, right? We should be realistic about the reasons why companies do what they do. So that's just a mild complaint. I think, you know, honestly, as practitioners, it may be frustrating to not have that granular targeting opportunities for some networks, but I also think that that potentially helps us grow as, you know, part of the broader campaign strategy. You know, the wizards and the great, you know, geniuses of the world that are TV media folks, they pick the broadest message and they say this will offend the least amount of people and move the most amount of people. And that is a big element of digital campaigning as well. And we use that targeting to get to the big kids table, but now any sort of competitive persuasion or GOTV program to reach a mass amount of voters is going to need to encompass some of those broad-based messaging.
Yeah, I think for those of us that have been doing it a long time, we've kind of joked like back to the good old days. Not as a good old days, the olden days of digital campaigning. So yeah, I think, you know, it kind of, it's some bumps in the road. Okay, we got to change our tracking and, you know, who's, you know, how are we going to do some Google search advertising and things like that, especially on, you know, shared donation platforms, which I'm sure ActBlue, you know, those who are driving traffic there are dealing with it, as are we, with different things. But at the end of the day, it's a bump in the road. We'll keep going. Apple can't stop us.
I do think one thing is that, and this is probably one of the things that is going to trigger Kari, is, you know, you're going to see less of the sort of traditional Facebook ads, and you're going to see more list brokering and list swaps and all of that stuff that digital strategists are pretty divided on. And that may gunk up the works in terms of deliverability if you have a, you know, a company that doesn't know how to do it right. So that's one thing that I think is a major change that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think you're right, it does trigger me. You know, I have for many, many years believed that every email ought to be an opt-in email. I kind of think we kind of lost that fight. And, you know, I think in the world of politics, what we have now is increasingly a culture where, I'm about swaps, but certainly buying lists, highly targeted lists, and it's happening. And I think, frankly, the audience out there has given up hope that they're going to be left alone once they've signed on to some political list somewhere. They're going to get bombarded with campaign emails. I do think it's tremendously important that campaigns do so when they do send emails, that they one, respect the opt-out per the terms of service of their platforms, almost certainly. But number two, do send emails that are ethical and are not, you know, where they don't lie to people. I think, you know, you saw the New York Times article about some of the Trump campaign's behavior. It's bipartisan. You know, there are lots of Nancy Pelosi emails where she promises to personally match every donation that comes in. She has the financial wherewithal to do so, and of course, she's not doing that. And we shouldn't lie in our email fundraising programs. And I think that's endemic everywhere. But as for the list brokering and list swapping and all that, yeah, those horses left the barn a long time ago.
I do think Nancy Pelosi can do anything she puts her mind to, though.
Oh, if she wants to personally match my donation, I'll look forward to that. Waiting for it.
That's great. I do find it interesting that people tend to complain a lot about what is trackable online, and they don't even know what's being tracked about them offline. Things like magazine subscriptions, car purchases, home purchases. I mean, major life events, arguably more major than what you're browsing online, are things that data companies curate, sell, and are able to be targeted. And you don't hear that talked about ever.
MasterCard and Visa have been in that business for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, part of the reason might, you know, anybody who's bought a car or signed a mortgage, you know, you could make the claim that you signed somewhere in there a paper that allows these companies to sell your information. Nobody reads. Fine print, we all know that. Putting that aside, I think you talk to anybody who has Facebook, they think it's completely free. They're giving up nothing. And we all know that's not true. It's not free. They're giving up their data to be able to, Facebook then turns around and uses to sell advertising. So I think that there's a way to allow people to understand sort of what they're giving up in a clear way. But to Annie's point, I think that these changes will have a far higher impact in the fundraising space.
Yeah, if people knew that why the Netflix movie that they wanted to see was recommended, that is what we're doing. People just they seem to ignore it when it benefits whatever they're looking for.
Yep.
People just don't want to see a political ad, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, these being free services that everyone's electing to use, it's interesting that they're complaining so much about them. Does anybody think that there's a marketplace for a subscription-based social media platform? Pay $7 to $15 a month, but none of your data is sold? I know one comment against that is that it's not going to be a customized user experience, and the user experience will not be as good, therefore. But does anybody think that that's got legs?
I just don't believe that the data is not sold. I think the trust there would be just, I don't think anyone would believe it.
I think the also thing that's different about the social media experience from television, from mail, is that TV, it's a one-way conversation, right? Mail, you look at it, you're done with it. Social and digital, you interact with it, you share it, you argue with your neighbor, you say that's a lie on the comment, you donate $5. And so people are looking for a different kind of user experience in some of these other platforms that we're stacking them up against. And you lose some of that, I'm going to show this, photo of my new house. Like if you only have an opted in user experience, who gets to see that cool thing that you did, right? So you lose some of what people go to social media platforms to use anyway.
I think it limits to who joins and things like that. I think to those of us who are in this world and even who just closely follow all the data stuff care a lot more about it. And I think it kind of becomes like, oh, that's crazy that they're stealing my data, but I'm still going to go back on Facebook tomorrow. So I think, and it's at this point too, this isn't 20 years ago when it was just at a few colleges. Everyone's already on these big networks and people want to be where their friends are. And I don't think that would be a big just change in our behavior, where I think it would be difficult. And again, going to the financial aspect of it, I think that quickly eliminates a lot of people.
Yeah, there have been multiple attempts to have privacy forward paid social networks. I paid $3 a month to one of them for 2 years before I suddenly realized what was happening on my credit card. And I never went to there because there's nobody there. The whole thing about social network is it has to have a meaningful number of your actual real life friends there to justify the time that you spend there, much less the money. And as soon as you create a money barrier, nobody shows up. The exception to that might be some very narrow sort of like, interest groups. You could see, well, certainly we know about there's private social networks for very high net worth individuals, for example, they hang out together. You could see industry groups of whether it's stockbrokers or Hollywood actors hanging out in sort of private clubs essentially on social networks. But in terms of a broad-based social network with 50 million Americans, I don't think that's going to happen if you charge money for it.
It's the same thing that we tell our clients. You can't just post and think everyone's going to see it. You have to promote it too. Otherwise, you're talking in a vacuum to yourself, your 3 friends.
That is a great point. So I know we've gone a little bit over, but this has been a great conversation. There's one more question that we wanted to ask the panelists. Finally, for the next election cycle, if you could change one thing with regard to platform behavior or government regulation, what would it be and why? I also put that in the Zoom chat for everybody, but could change one thing with regard to platform behavior or government regulation, what would it be and why?
I've got one.
All right.
I think all members of Congress should have to go to digital school and learn what we're talking about before they make policies on it.
I was going to say something similar. I would say, like, before anybody comes out with policies and regulations, whether it's on social media, text messaging, I mean, that's something we didn't even talk about. That's going to change a lot. Yeah, the requirement is they have to actually talk and learn, talk to people who actually use the mediums and how we interact with it and how we handle it and how people take in the media versus just making arbitrary regulations that make no sense. That is what I would ask for as well. Like, talk to the real people who do this stuff.
I would roll back Facebook's entire advertising infrastructure to about 5 years ago, and then implement the postcard. You got to prove you're an American to buy political ads thing. Sure, fine, but the excessively Baroque kind of system of business managers and account managers and all of the nonsense, I would get rid of all of that, rip it all down, and make it like you should be able to just take a graphic, some copy, choose who you want to target, give us, put in a credit card number and let it rip. Simplicity is key here. So Mr. Zuckerberg, if you're listening, make it easy for us to give you money.
In my fantasy world, since I don't know that any of these things will actually happen, I'm gonna pivot and say more regulation. I want to know every advertising, the spend, what people are saying. There is a lot out there on the Hulus and the DSPs of the world that we're not able to track and share with our clients. And from a purely selfish standpoint, you're able to see, okay, we're outpointed on television, we got to do more. And if people really had a better sense of what was on the internet, because I do not think you can just take Google and Facebook and extrapolate from there, because there's a lot of different reasons why that doesn't really work. You could better make the argument to clients and better illustrate how seriously we're being outspent. I think that's the one thing that Republicans, and Patrick, I know you and the priorities have done a great job trying to catch up, but Republicans do, I think, really spend a lot more online in places that we can't see. And we're going to need to continue to be competitive. And that would be one place that I think would be incredibly helpful to both sides.
And not just from a tactical standpoint for practitioners, but for journalists and other observers from a democracy and a sort of accountability perspective. It all ought to be transparent out there.
Yeah, in a perfect world, we'd have, like Andy said, legislators who understood how to use the internet, who could then pass sensible regulations so that all of these platforms are on the same playing field in terms of disclosure of ad spending, the regulations around how the types of sort of ad spending that they will take if an approval process is included in that, great. These are all complicated issues, but understanding it's not a perfect world. I think the very least that Facebook as a platform could do, and Google as a platform, particularly on YouTube, is do something about their algorithm that continues to promote inflammatory false information that is harming our democracy. They're making a choice every single day to allow their algorithm to do that. And they don't need regulation to stop. They just need pressure. And so that to me would be one great change that I think would help the country.
Terrific. What a
All
great discussion. Ben, great job. Thank you for moderating today, Ben Olson. Carter Kidd, Patrick McHugh, Shannon Chatlos, Annie Levene, Kari Chisholm, thank you for this great discussion today. Really appreciate your time and all your efforts. And I hope our audience has enjoyed the conversation. And we'll continue to do programs like this and bring new insights to light. And so thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Good night, everybody.
Great talking, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye.